She was only 13 years old, pregnant, shackled, and sentenced to spend the rest of her life in prison under an adult law. Her name was Latasha Armstead, also known in some records as Latasha Williams, and her case became one of the most controversial juvenile prosecutions in Wisconsin history. But behind this case were two painful truths. A woman named Charlotte Brown lost her life in a brutal crime, and a child, barely a teenager, was treated by the justice system like she was already grown. So the question is, what does justice look like when the person responsible is only 13 years old? Milwaukee, Wisconsin, July 1997. Charlotte Brown was 50 years old. She worked as a visiting nurse and was known for caring for others, including Latasha's grandmother. But one day, Charlotte walked into a situation that would end her life and change multiple families forever. According to prosecutors, Latasha Armstead and her 17-year-old boyfriend, James Williams, planned to steal Charlotte Brown's red Chevrolet Cavalier. Authorities said the attack turned deadly. James Williams was accused of strangling Charlotte with a telephone cord, while Charlotte was also repeatedly stabbed. Charlotte Brown did not survive. Her loved ones were left with a pain that no trial, no sentence, and no amount of time could erase. And soon, a 13-year-old girl became tied to one of Wisconsin's most debated criminal cases. Latasha was not charged as a child. She was not handled only in juvenile court. She was charged as an adult. At the time, Wisconsin had a law that allowed children as young as 10 years old to be prosecuted as adults for certain homicide offenses. And because of that law, Latasha, only 13 years old, was pushed into an adult criminal system. In 1999, she was convicted of first-degree intentional homicide as a party to the crime. The sentence was life in prison. At an age when most kids are starting 8th grade, Latasha was given a punishment meant for adults. She became known as the youngest person in Wisconsin history tried as an adult for that level of crime. And from that moment on, her case split people into two very emotional sides. For Charlotte Brown's family and supporters, the focus was clear. Charlotte was an innocent woman. She was a nurse. She was helping someone's family, and her life was violently taken. They wanted accountability. They wanted justice for Charlotte. And they wanted the world to remember that behind every courtroom headline was a real woman whose future was stolen. But others looked at Latasha and saw something else. They saw a child, a 13-year-old girl who came from a life filled with instability, poverty, addiction, abandonment, and incarceration around her. Reports said her father was imprisoned. Her mother struggled with addiction. Latasha had dropped out of school in the 6th grade. Advocates argued that none of that erased what happened to Charlotte Brown, but it did raise a serious question. Can a child that young truly understand consequences the same way an adult can? Then came another detail that made the case even more painful and disturbing. Latasha was pregnant when she entered custody. She gave birth while incarcerated, and according to reports, she was shackled. Her baby was later taken from her. A child gave birth to a child while serving a life sentence. That image alone became one of the reasons her case kept coming back into public debate. Not because people forgot Charlotte Brown, not because the crime was excused, but because people began asking whether the justice system had gone too far when it treated a 13-year-old as if she were fully grown. Latasha spent years in prison, then decades. She became eligible for parole in 2014 when she was around 30 years old. But parole boards repeatedly denied her release. Officials cited concerns about public safety. Advocates continued pushing back, saying her case represented something deeper: the adultification of Black children, the way young girls can be viewed as older, tougher, or more responsible than they really are. And while those debates continued, Latasha stayed behind bars, year after year, until the little girl who entered prison grew into a woman. After nearly 28 years incarcerated, Latasha Armstead was eventually released from prison at 42 years old. But freedom was not simple. According to supporters after her release, the outside world felt unfamiliar. She had to learn basic things most people experience as teenagers or young adults. Using a cell phone, opening a bank account, reading a restaurant menu, understanding automatic sinks, finding housing, looking for work, trying to rebuild a life from nothing. She walked out of prison as an adult woman, but she had gone in as a child, and that is what makes this case so complicated. Because Charlotte Brown's life mattered deeply, her death was real, her family's pain was real, and the crime that took her life should never be minimized. But Latasha's age also matters, her childhood matters, the law that sentenced her matters, and the question of whether a 13-year-old should spend almost 3 decades in prison still matters. So now, years later, this case still forces people to sit with uncomfortable questions. What does accountability look like when the person responsible is a child? Can a 13-year-old fully understand death, consequence, and forever? And after 28 years behind bars, is justice complete? Or does justice demand something more complicated than punishment alone? Charlotte Brown lost her life. Latasha Armstead lost her childhood. And this case remains one of Wisconsin's most painful reminders that sometimes the courtroom doesn't just decide guilt. Sometimes it forces an entire society to decide what it believes a child truly is. Rest in peace to Charlotte Brown, and may every family connected to this case continue searching for healing in a story where no one walked away untouched. If stories like this interest you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Storytime for more real stories, real crime, and twisted endings. Real stories only.